Behind the dazzling lights, glamorous gowns, and carefully staged smiles of Hollywood's golden age, another world was unfolding, one you were never meant to see. To the public, stars lived picture-perfect lives filled with romance, elegance, and timeless beauty. But once the cameras stopped rolling and the studio press agents turned their backs, the real stories began. Hidden in whispered rumors, coded invitations, and secret addresses was a side of Hollywood so daring that revealing it could have destroyed entire careers overnight. The movie industry thrived on illusions. Studios controlled every image, every headline, and even the personal relationships of their stars. If a leading man was rumored to be uninterested in the studio-approved romances, an executive might pair him with a glamorous actress for a photo op. If a starlet was seen drinking too much or stepping out of line, a columnist might be persuaded to print a softer story. The public only saw polished perfection, but the more the industry tried to hide its flaws, the more fascinating the secrets became behind closed doors, where the truth didn't have to smile for cameras. These weren't harmless eccentricities. They were hidden interests, unconventional habits, and private choices that could never be shown in magazines or on theater screens. Stars who defined elegance during the day were sneaking into masked gatherings at night. The very actors who played wholesome family men on screen were known to request imaginative setups once the doors were locked. And entire underground networks grew just to cater to the sides of themselves that polite society refused to acknowledge. What you're about to hear are 7 of the most striking stories of hidden Hollywood lives, secrets of the silver screen that reveal how different the real lives of its stars were from the stories they sold us. These aren't just whispers or unconfirmed rumors. Many of them trace back to memoirs, first-hand accounts, or decades-old investigations finally made public. And together, they paint a picture of an industry that was always about more than just movies. It was about power, control, and the constant dance between image and longing. Scotty Bowers may not be a household name, but within Hollywood's most exclusive circles, he was the man everyone knew. A former Marine who landed in Los Angeles after World War II, Bowers stumbled into a side career that would make him the trusted go-between for the biggest names in entertainment. His gas station on Hollywood Boulevard wasn't just a place for filling tanks, it was the front for something much more discreet. Behind the innocent exterior, Bowers quietly arranged introductions for actors and actresses who couldn't pursue their interests publicly. In his memoir, Full Service, Bowers claimed to have connected hundreds of stars with companions who shared their private interests. Some wanted private company at a time when public discovery could end a career. Others requested private gatherings, themed experiences, or dramatic performances that would have surprised the very fans who worshipped them on screen. Whatever the preference, the goal was the same: safety, discretion, and control over a narrative that otherwise belonged to the studios. What made Bowers so effective was his ability to keep secrets. He wasn't just a broker, he was a protector. His clients trusted him because he never exposed them while they were alive. Only decades later, in his 80s, did he publish his tell-all when nearly everyone involved had already passed away. Even then, he framed many accounts carefully, echoing a code of silence that ruled the era. Names whispered in connection with Bowers included Katharine Hepburn, Spencer Tracy, and Cary Grant. While some historians debate the accuracy of specific stories, few deny that Bowers tapped into something very real: the hidden interests of a generation forced to perform not just in front of cameras, but in their private lives as well. Hollywood in the late 1940s and 1950s was policed by morality clauses, rigid censorship rules, and columnists who could make or break a reputation with a single paragraph. Against that backdrop, Bowers offered something extraordinary: choice and privacy. His story reminds us how controlled Hollywood was. Stars couldn't simply live authentically. They needed intermediaries to discreetly arrange what society condemned. And while his approach was unique, it wasn't the only way hidden interests surfaced. Some people didn't arrange meetings, they drew them. Enter Willie, an artist whose work blurred the lines between underground art and hidden imagination. Born John Alexander Scott Coutts, Willie became one of the most important figures in alternative magazine culture during the 1940s and 1950s. His publication, Bizarre, launched in 1946, was unlike anything the American public had seen. While mainstream outlets were bound by censorship laws and strict morality codes, Bizarre pushed boundaries with illustrations and photographs of women in corsets, towering heels, and elaborate stylized outfits that hinted at complex dynamics without spelling them out. Willie's most famous creation was the cartoon character Sweet Gwendolyn, a wide-eyed damsel who was constantly entangled in intricate stylized setups, silk cords, satin ribbons, and theatrical accents. The stories were melodramatic by design, a tongue-in-cheek serial that used humor to soften images that, in another context, would have been too daring for the era. For the first time, niche fashion, tight-laced waists, high-heeled boots, dramatic gloves, was being drawn with artistic precision and sold to paying customers. To own a copy of Bazaar in the 1940s was like holding contraband. Copies circulated quietly, passed between collectors, or hidden behind false book covers. What makes Willie's work so surprising in hindsight is how it quietly influenced the mainstream. Costume departments and fashion photographers borrowed elements of his aesthetic: wasp waists, opera-length gloves, and sultry, choreographed poses, without ever admitting where the inspiration came from. What was once considered daring in magazines eventually trickled into film noir styling, pin-up photography, and even high-fashion editorials. Directors and stylists learned that suggestion could be more powerful than being explicit, and Willie's visual language offered an entire toolkit of suggestion. It's also important to remember the audience. Soldiers returning from war brought back altered tastes and a curiosity about the wider world. Bazaar circulated among readers who recognized it as a coded language, an insider's nod that said, "You're not the only one." Willie may have worked in the shadows, but his vision helped shape how glamour itself was portrayed. And he wasn't alone. While Willie gave hidden culture a stylish, almost elegant polish, another artist would take it deeper underground, with imagery far more raw, theatrical, and uncompromising. That man was Bilbrew, a name not as famous as the stars he inspired, but a giant in the world of underground illustration. Working under pseudonyms, Bilbrew became a prolific artist for pulp covers and private commissions throughout the 1950s and beyond. His work was often distributed in discreet shops or through secretive mail-order catalogs, catering to an audience desperate for imagery that mainstream culture refused to acknowledge. Bilbrew specialized in heightened drama, masked figures, elaborate costumes, and exaggerated scenarios that leaned into pure fantasy. His illustrations depicted commanding characters, theatrical disguises, and choreographed tension that made even John Willie's work look restrained by comparison. Where Willie evoked a salon, Bilbrew conjured a stage, curtains lifting, spotlights burning, characters entering on a cue only the audience could hear. But the risk was real. In the 1950s, strict content laws were harshly enforced. Distributors risked arrest, and artists like Bilbrew worked in secrecy. Many pieces were unsigned or published under false names, meaning much of his contribution was obscured for decades. Only later did historians recognize how influential he had been. He was one of the first African-American artists to leave a major mark on this underground space, a boundary breaker whose work, though often hidden, resonated far beyond the subculture that first embraced it. Bilbrew's story shows how much of Hollywood's adjacent culture existed in shadows. Even when artists created work inspired by the same impulses that drove the stars, they had to hide it from view. Yet, while illustrators were sketching their visions, many of Hollywood's leading ladies were living theirs, carefully, quietly, and on their own terms. Perhaps no story captures this better than the hidden network of Golden Age Hollywood. While the studios carefully staged romances between leading men and women to sell films, behind the curtain, many of Hollywood's most glamorous actresses were exploring close personal connections with each other. The public saw red carpet smiles. Friends saw coded glances and private alliances built to withstand scrutiny. Joan Crawford often sits at the center of this web. Described by some chroniclers as openly adventurous, Crawford is said to have had close connections with Greta Garbo, Marlene Dietrich, Barbara Stanwyck, and even a young Marilyn Monroe. Biographers differ on details, but many agree that Crawford's charisma was magnetic. She was a star who understood her power, and she wasn't afraid to test the limits of the rules that governed her image. These weren't isolated encounters. They were part of a quiet network where women who were forced to play traditional goddesses on screen could finally be themselves. Crawford reportedly had a crush on Bette Davis, which not only fueled one of Hollywood's greatest rivalries, but also added another layer to their legend. Publicly, they were painted as rivals clawing for roles. Privately, some suggest the tension had more complicated roots: admiration, pride, and an iron will to control their own destinies in a system that rarely allowed it. The studios worked tirelessly to hide these stories. Attraction outside traditional norms was considered a moral scandal, one that could sink a star's career instantly. Yet, the whispers never stopped. Marlene Dietrich was rumored to host private salons where conversation, music, and affection intertwined beyond public labels. Greta Garbo, the Queen of Mystery, was often linked romantically to both men and women, and Monroe's experimentation has been hinted at by more than one biographer, usually couched in the careful language of rumored, alleged, and suggested. To imagine the risks these women took, consider how even a single ambiguous photograph, an arm held too long, a look that lingered, could spark headlines. Columnists watched doorways, detectives watched nightclubs. Still, in small apartments and dimly lit parlors, stars built communities where they could live truthfully, even if only for an evening. Together, these connections reveal that what Hollywood presented as ideal love on screen was often a carefully staged illusion. Now picture a Hollywood mansion draped in velvet curtains, chandeliers dimmed, and a guest list of A-listers wearing masks that conceal every identifying line. For many actors, this wasn't fantasy. It was a way of life. Reports from insiders and whispers in memoirs suggest that private parties frequently revolved around elaborate costumes and masquerade themes. Intricate gowns, masks, and role reversals were common motifs, turning ballrooms into secret stages where stars could explore sides of themselves the public would never be allowed to see. Masks served more than a theatrical function. They gave anonymity. A leading man could experiment with clothing and character without fear of tomorrow's headlines. A famous actress could test the boundaries of identity while remaining just another masked figure in the crowd. These gatherings were part performance, part liberation, an improvised theater where the script was written by the guests and the only critic that mattered was the heart pounding behind a satin disguise. Why did masquerade culture flourish? Surveillance. Studio executives tracked their actors' schedules, monitored whom they dined with, and scrutinized every photo. A mask, a robe, a new persona, these were tools of freedom. Hidden behind velvet curtains and altered silhouettes, the elite of Hollywood shed their public images and embraced experiences they could never acknowledge outside those walls. Sometimes the music lasted until dawn, when limousines picked up sleepy stars and returned them to perfectly staged morning routines, press appointments, hair tests, costume fittings, like nothing had happened at all. These parties weren't chaotic, they were curated. Invitations moved through trusted hands. Staff were vetted. Stories rarely leaked because the same silence that protected one guest protected them all. The masquerade wasn't merely a party, it was a pact. Roleplay was one of the most closely guarded, yet surprisingly common indulgences among Hollywood's elite. Scotty Bowers hinted in his book that stars often requested elaborate setups for private experiences. Fictional recreations staged with theatrical precision. The very people who played family-friendly roles on film were sometimes the same ones asking for imaginative performances in private. What's striking is how often these themes mirrored Hollywood itself. Stars lived in a world where every moment was scripted, where wardrobe and lighting decided how a character felt. It's no surprise some brought scripts into their private lives too. For a few, roleplay offered escape from relentless self-presentation, a few hours when the character was allowed to be anyone but the person on the poster. For others, it was a way to test boundaries safely, to explore identities they wouldn't publicly acknowledge in an era that punished deviation from the norm. The secrecy around these experiences was absolute. A single rumor could ruin a reputation, so roleplay had to be conducted in the strictest confidence. Covers were booked, props sourced quietly, and participants sworn to silence. What makes it so surprising today is the disconnect between the images fans adored, smiling stars promoting innocence, and the reality of what went on behind the scenes. In a way, the contradiction was theatrical too. By day, America's sweethearts. By night, curious humans writing scenes for an audience of two. Then there was the House of Francis, one of the most whispered about private venues in Hollywood history. Run by proprietor Lee Francis during the 1930s, this discreet private club operated out of the Hacienda Arms apartments on the Sunset Strip. It wasn't an ordinary hangout. It was a luxurious hideaway that catered to some of the biggest names in the film industry. Stars like Jean Harlow were rumored to have visited, and the murmurs about what went on inside felt startling for the era. Unlike the seedy dives found elsewhere, the House of Francis presented as high class. Its clientele were elite, and the experiences went far beyond the ordinary. According to chatter that survived the decades, Harlow herself was said to have unusual preferences that surprised even the staff. Other stars allegedly sought carefully staged scenarios that blurred the lines between fantasy and drama. Still controlled, still theatrical, but designed to deliver a sense of risk within a meticulously managed environment. In a world where studios crafted every image to perfection, the house provided a place where stars could let go without public consequence. The venue existed within a complex web of protection, industry insiders, friendly officials, and a culture of mutual silence that kept doors open and names off the record. It became an open secret, a place everyone in certain circles knew about but no one acknowledged publicly. To mention it in polite society was unthinkable, but within the film community, its reputation was legendary. The existence of such a venue reveals how deep Hollywood's culture of secrecy ran. If a star couldn't trust a discreet go-between like Bowers or find anonymity at a masquerade, there was always a gilded doorway on Sunset where visions would be protected. Over time, the house faded into legend, but its memory remains a reminder of how much was hidden beneath Hollywood's golden glow. How many careers depended not only on talent and luck, but also on carefully guarded privacy. It's tempting to ask why these secrets endured for so long. The answer is a triangle of incentives. Studios wanted control, stars wanted privacy, the press wanted access. Columnists who played along received exclusives. Publicists who kept a lid on rumors got better placements. Police and officials, when friendly, kept the carousel moving. The system's engine was reciprocity. Everyone needed something from everyone else, and silence was the fee for entry. Another reason, audiences embraced the illusion. Fans wanted romance, sparkle, and happily ever after stories. They weren't paying to see reality, they were paying to feel uplifted. The machine understood that appetite and catered to it. Ironically, the more perfect the on-screen images became, the more the private lives of stars drifted into the realm of experimentation, curiosity, and escape. When the public version of you is a saint, the private version can only be human. For all the fascination, there was a cost. Living under constant surveillance meant never fully relaxing. Many stars spoke about the loneliness of fame, rooms full of people, but few they could trust. The elaborate gatherings, dramatic scenes, and discreet introductions weren't always about thrill. Sometimes they were about relief. In a life where every gesture could be misread, these hidden spaces offered something like oxygen. The irony is that the very secrecy that protected reputations also forced deeper secrecy, creating double lives that were exhausting to maintain. And yet, these private worlds left a cultural imprint. Fashion absorbed daring silhouettes. Cinema learned the power of suggestion. Photographers borrowed the language of masks, veils, and shadows to convey mystery without saying a word. Even today, when standards are looser and public conversations are more open, you can still see the old codes. The sideways glance, the gloved hand, the lace that covers more than it reveals. The golden age of Hollywood was built on illusion. On screen, stars embodied elegance, romance, and virtue. Off-screen, their private lives were far more complex. From Scotty Bowers arranging secret introductions to John Willie and Jean Bilbrew sketching visions that quietly influenced film and fashion, to Joan Crawford and her circle defying narrow definitions of love, the reality of Hollywood was always stranger and more human than the fiction it sold. Masquerade parties, suggestive costumes, imaginative roleplay, and discreet private clubs weren't random habits. They were survival mechanisms in an industry that demanded perfection while denying authenticity. To live as themselves, stars carved out spaces where they could explore sides of themselves the world wasn't ready to accept. In doing so, they left behind a hidden history that reveals more about Hollywood than any press release ever could. The surprising truth isn't just that these private choices existed, it's that the system was designed to keep them buried. For decades, fans adored images of purity and romance while the real Hollywood pulsed with secrecy, longing, and carefully guarded indulgence. The more the studios tried to protect reputations, the more elaborate the double lives became. So the next time you see an old Hollywood film, remember this: the greatest performance of all wasn't on the silver screen. It was the act of keeping these secrets in the wings. And now that we know them, we can finally see the golden age for what it truly was: an age of glamour built on shadows. Which one of these hidden stories surprised you the most? Share your thoughts below, because the tale of Hollywood's secrets is far from over.